I was 63 years old, standing in my own kitchen, holding a manila envelope that would blow up 31 years of marriage, and the man who handed it to me couldn't even look me in the eye while he did it. Hi, I'm Lauren. Before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, you are not ready for the ending, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from. I read every single one of them, and it means the world to me that you're here. Now let's get into it. 2 weeks. That's all it had been. 2 weeks before that envelope landed on my kitchen counter, I had wired $40,000, my retirement cushion, the money I had squirreled away since I was 32 years old working double shifts as a school administrator, to bail my husband out of a debt he swore would ruin us if I didn't help. $40,000. Gone. And 2 weeks later he wanted a divorce. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before this happened so you understand who I became after. I married my husband when I was 31. He was charming, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order, and made you feel like the only person in the room. We built a life together. A modest house in the suburbs, 2 children who are grown now with families of their own, a golden retriever named Biscuit who's since passed, and 31 years of what I thought was partnership. I trusted him with everything. My bank accounts. My retirement. My heart. About 4 months before the papers showed up, he came to me looking gray in the face, the way people look when something is eating them alive from the inside. He told me he'd made some bad investments. Then it became a friend he'd co-signed a loan for who defaulted. Then it became credit card debt he'd been hiding for years. The number kept climbing every time he told the story, like he was testing how much I could swallow before I choked. $40,000. That was the final figure. He said if we didn't handle it quietly, it would hit our credit, maybe even lead to legal trouble. He said our house could be at risk. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, after everything we've built, I need you to trust me one more time. So I did what any wife of 31 years would do. I drained the account I'd built for my own retirement. Money that was supposed to be my safety net, my ticket to travel and rest and finally breathe after decades of working, and I handed it to him without a single condition attached. No paperwork. No promise in writing. Just trust, because that's what marriage is supposed to be built on. 2 weeks later, I came home from visiting my sister to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him. He didn't even wait for me to take my coat off. He said, Lauren, I think it's time we talk about separating. Then he slid the envelope across the table like he was returning a library book. I want you to imagine that feeling. The floor tilting under you. Your whole chest going cold and hollow in the same breath. I had just given this man every dollar of security I had left in the world, and he was sitting there, freshly showered, freshly shaved, telling me our marriage was over. I asked him why. I asked him what changed in 2 weeks. He said something about growing apart and wanting different things, the kind of vague, rehearsed nonsense that tells you a person has been planning their exit long before they announce it. I sat there in silence because something in my gut, something old and quiet that I'd ignored for months, was screaming at me that this wasn't sudden at all. This had been coming for a long time. I had just been too trusting, too in love with the version of him I'd built in my head to see it. If you've ever had that moment, where your entire history with someone gets rewritten in front of your eyes in real time, comment below, because I promise you, you are not alone, and I need you to keep watching because what I found afterward changed everything. I didn't cry that night. I want to be honest with you because that surprised even me. I felt something colder than grief. I felt suspicion. 31 years with a man teaches you his tells, even the ones he doesn't know he has. And that night, packing a bag to stay with my sister, I noticed something. His phone, sitting face down on the counter, buzzed 3 times in a row. He didn't even glance at it. A man who had just blown up his marriage should have been distracted, emotional, maybe reaching for his phone to call someone he trusted. Instead, he was calm, almost relieved. So I did something I am not proud of, but I do not regret. I picked up that phone while he was in the shower, and because I had set it up for him years ago when he complained technology confused him, I still remembered the passcode. I want you to sit with that irony for a second. I set up the very phone that would end up exposing him. What I found in those messages was not another woman, not at first. It was worse in a strange way because it was calculated. There were messages between him and a man I didn't recognize. A name I'd never heard in 31 years of marriage. They were discussing a property, an investment property purchased 6 months prior, under a name that was not mine, using funds that had been moved around in increments just small enough to avoid raising flags. $40,000. The exact number. There was no debt. There was no desperate friend, no credit card catastrophe, no threat to our home. My husband had been quietly funneling money into an investment property he intended to keep entirely separate from our marriage, and when he came up short on the final payment, he manufactured a crisis, played on 31 years of my trust, and used my own retirement money to close the deal. Then, once the ink was dry on that property, he no longer needed me. He needed the marriage to end quickly, quietly, before I could ask too many questions about where his debt had actually gone. I sat on the edge of that guest bathroom floor at my sister's house and I felt something shift in me. Not sadness anymore. Clarity. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that click, that moment where hurt turns into resolve, I want you to type the word clarity in the comments, because that's exactly what saved me in the weeks that followed. I didn't confront him immediately. I want to be very clear about that because I know some of you are the type who would have thrown that phone at his head the second you found it. But I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to know that anger without a plan is just noise. And I was done making noise. I wanted results. I called my daughter first, who works in finance, and she helped me understand exactly what had happened with the money on paper, how it had moved, where it had landed, and most importantly, that because those funds came directly from an account solely in my name with no formal loan agreement and no gift documentation, there was a very real argument that the money was never legally his to spend in the first place. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A friend from my college years who had built her entire career on messy, high-conflict divorces just like the one I was about to walk into. I told her everything. The $40,000. The fabricated debt. The property. The timing of the papers. She went quiet on the phone for a moment, and then she said something I will never forget. Lauren, he just handed us the rope he's going to hang himself with. For the next 3 weeks, I played a role I never thought I'd have to play. I stayed calm. I stayed pleasant even when he came by to pick up a few of his things. I let him believe he had gotten away clean. I let him believe I was simply a heartbroken older woman, quietly packing up 3 decades of memories, too devastated to ask hard questions. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, my lawyer was building a case, pulling financial records, tracing the property purchase, and preparing documentation that would make it very difficult for him to walk away with what he thought he'd secured. The day of our first mediation meeting, he walked in looking like a man who already knew how this story ended. Confident. Almost smug. He had his own lawyer beside him, a stack of papers outlining a fairly standard split, house sold, assets divided, both of us moving on with modest, equal shares. He had no idea what was coming. My lawyer opened by asking him very calmly to explain a wire transfer of $40,000 from my personal retirement account 4 months prior. He gave the same story he'd given me. The debt, the desperate situation, the friend who'd defaulted. My lawyer let him finish. She let him get comfortable. And then she placed a single document on the table between us. The deed to the investment property, purchased 6 weeks before that wire transfer even happened, financed with a down payment that matched, almost to the dollar, the exact figure of debt he claimed to owe. I watched his face in that moment, and I want you to know it is a memory I will treasure until the day I die. All the color drained out of him. His lawyer went very still beside him. The kind of stillness that tells you even your own attorney didn't know what you'd been hiding. He opened his mouth twice and closed it again, because there was nothing he could say that would make sense of what was sitting right in front of him in black and white. My lawyer, calm as ever, simply said, "We have reason to believe this transfer was obtained under false pretenses, and we intend to pursue this not just as a marital asset dispute, but as a matter of financial fraud between spouses. Would you like to reconsider your position before we proceed?" His confidence, the same confidence he walked in with, the same confidence he'd worn like a coat every single day since he slid that divorce envelope across our kitchen table, disappeared right in front of me. If you've ever watched a bully realize the tables have turned, you know exactly the look I'm describing. What followed over the next several months wasn't glamorous or cinematic like you might see in a movie. It was slow, methodical, and at times exhausting. But it worked. Because the money had come from an account solely in my name with no documentation proving it was a gift or loan to him personally, and because there was clear evidence he had misrepresented the purpose of that money to obtain it, My lawyer was able to argue successfully that the $40,000, plus a portion of the equity in that investment property purchased with those funds, belonged to me as a matter of restitution, separate from the standard division of our marital assets. He fought it, of course. Men like that always do. But every time his lawyer tried to spin a new narrative, my lawyer simply laid another piece of evidence on the table, until eventually, even his own attorney seemed to grow tired of defending a story that kept unraveling further with each meeting. In the end, I did not just walk away whole. I walked away with the house, since I was the one who had genuinely invested in maintaining and paying for it over the years, while his hidden funds went elsewhere. I walked away with my retirement essentially restored, thanks to the restitution built into our settlement. And most importantly, I walked away with something money could never have given me: the absolute certainty that I had not been foolish. I had simply trusted a man who did not deserve it, and when the truth came out, I had the strength and the support to stand up and demand what was fair. I won't pretend this experience didn't change me. There are still nights I lie awake thinking about the version of myself that handed over $40,000 without a second thought, simply because a man I loved asked me to. I used to feel embarrassed about that. Now I feel something closer to compassion for her, for that trusting, devoted woman who believed marriage meant partnership, even when it clearly didn't for the person standing across from her. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story today, it's this: trust is not something you owe blindly to someone simply because of how many years you've spent with them. Real partnership shows itself in transparency, not in demands wrapped in urgency and guilt. If someone in your life is asking you to hand over everything without giving you a single piece of paper, a single explanation that holds up to scrutiny, or a single ounce of accountability, please take a breath before you say yes. I wish someone had told me that 31 years ago. These days, life looks different for me. I've reconnected with old friends I let slip away during the marriage. I've taken up painting again, something I hadn't touched since my 20s. My daughter and I are closer than we've ever been, partly because she was the one who helped me see clearly when I couldn't see anything at all. And every single morning, I wake up in the house that is truly mine, and I remind myself that the woman who survived this, the 63-year-old widow of a marriage built on lies, is stronger than the version of me who ever thought she needed him to feel secure. If my story touched you today, please give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and how many of you out there have lived through something similar and come out the other side. You are not alone, and you are certainly not foolish for trusting people. That says more about your heart than it ever will about your judgment. Thank you for sitting with me through this story today. There's more where this came from, so stay close, and I'll see you in the next one.